agenda circulated on the seats in the gallery, so please take one. Oh, they're coming now, I beg your pardon. They're a little bit late in arriving. No, never. So we'll just wait for those to arrive. In the meantime, welcome tonight to everyone to tonight's council meeting. The membership is as listed. We will commence the evening, tonight's meeting. Do we have any apologies this evening from councillors?
Mr Mayor, it appears we have Councillor Greco and Councillor Lawrence's apologies.
Thank you. We'll note Councillor Greco and Councillor Lawrence as apologies this evening. I beg your pardon, Councillor Greco has actually requested a leave of absence, so we'll record that as leave of absence. Okay. However, Councillor Lawrence is an apology this evening. Item 3, disclosures of conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest from councillors?
No, Mr Mayor.
No? Okay, thank you. We'll then move on to confirmation of minutes of previous council meetings.
Happy to move.
Moved Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor McCarthy. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Do we have any requests for suspension of standing orders?
Yes, I do, yes. Mr Mayor, in order to present a petition to the council.
Okay, do we need
I thought we did after question time.
Or do we ask for public question time?
No, you actually can't do that. No. You can just submit it as part of the... Yeah, we don't need to
submit it under normal business? We don't need to table it or anything?
Nope,
okay.
Just submit it.
Fine, thank you.
Were any other councillors considering a suspension of standing orders?
No. I've got a petition, but I will submit it as...
That's not what I asked, councillor. It's not what I asked. It's not what I asked. Are there any other councillors considering suspension of standing orders for any other matters?
No, just urgent business later on to be presented as per
look, I will, Mr Mayor.
You will request a suspension of standing orders, yes?
Yep, just to make the...
okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Lee, seconded. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of suspending standing orders? Those against? Councillor Walsh.
Just to make a brief statement about things which have been in the media, and once again I'll post on record if I've offended people by my remarks last week. I apologise. I would never intentionally try to offend people or try to whitewash history. So if I've offended people, I apologise, and it seems that I have. So I'm in the process of reconciling that. My point last week was that I don't believe that local government should be getting involved in the
okay, Councillor Walsh, I think we won't need to go into too much detail. I take it tonight that your formal apologies in relation to your comments in relation to the genocide item considered several weeks ago.
If it's caused any offence.
Thank you. That's your formal apologies presented to the council and to the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Resumption of standing orders. Councillor Lee has called for resumption of standing orders. Seconded Councillor Cetus. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. We'll now resume tonight's meeting. So over to item 5, public question time. We do have some questions that have been submitted this evening, so I'll read those out and we'll provide written responses to those which have been submitted this evening. Those who came in early, I do have some responses for those. This question comes from Kathleen Marsh from McLeod in relation to parking restrictions. Will parking restrictions be imposed in the estate Latrobe in the estate to include restrictions to prohibit Latrobe students parking in the estate, restricting access to locals and endangering persons, elderly citizens? There has been some submissions to council and some information in relation to this question as well. Okay, so we'll provide a written response to that question from Kathleen, and we also have an additional one here in relation to the colourboard fence erected by Latrobe University. I think we've already written to several residents, but we'll also include the response to Kathleen in relation to that matter as well. Other questions this evening submitted from Serena from Reservoir. A couple of questions here. Does Darebin Council acknowledge that Australia was invaded and colonised? 2, does Darebin Council acknowledge that acts of genocide were committed in this country against Aboriginal peoples? And 3, will Council censure Councillor Walsh for his widely reported remarks? Okay, all right. Well, Councillor Walsh has made a formal apology this evening, but we'll respond to that in full content as well. Okay, question from Keith Coffey from Reservoir. How long does it take to cut branches? Report started way back in February. The replies in letterboxes, still not trimmed. Okay, so we've got some locations here. And you've lodged obviously other requests, so we'll respond to that and have some officers attend to it. The question's a little awkward, so there are some suggestions as to how to best deal with it. Okay, other questions lodged this evening, which came via email during the course of the day from Damien Kingsbury from Thornbury. Question to Council. There's been doubt raised publicly about the inclusion of a reference to Aboriginal communities as at a genocide monument that there were issues because technically it is not recognised genocide. The United Nations definition of genocide ratified in 1984 does contain a substantial explanation. I won't read all of it. In all of the well-documented history of mass killings of Aboriginals or attempts to destroy large groups of Aborigines through the poisoning of water, foodstuffs and the distribution of infected blankets, the forced sterilisation of Aboriginal women and the forcible transferring of Aboriginal children to other groups, do all councils agree that these acts constitute a recognised genocide in the Australian Aboriginal context? Do all councillors recognise that this fate represent the central concern of Australia's Indigenous peoples and the rest of the Aboriginal community who recognise the wrongs committed to Australia's First Peoples and the trauma they still experience, and if not, that their only solution is to resign? Questions. Do comments by councillor or councillors on the issue of Aboriginal genocide, which are gravely offensive to Victoria's largest Indigenous urban community, breach the Code of Conduct? And if so, what remedy is available to such offensive behaviour? Additional question, including with this comment. Can the council explain how council might manage to accrue expenses of between $8,000 and $10,000 on taxi and phone calls, and can all councillors confirm that none of the taxi trips or phone calls paid by the ratepayers were of a private nature, including travel to or attendance at party political functions or arranging extracurricular party activities? Okay, these will require detailed responses, so I thank those who have submitted the questions here this evening. Okay, some of those require a little bit of content, I think, Jacinta, so we might actually touch base with some of those people who lodge questions to get a little bit more clarity as to the exact requirements here. Okay, members of the gallery, that concludes questions from those which were lodged during the course of the day and also before the meeting. We'll also work on providing much more detailed responses in written form. That concludes public question time. So we'll now go to consideration reports. I do understand agendas have been circulated now this evening. That's correct, yes? So you can please follow tonight's meeting with the agendas which have been provided. First one is 6.1, funding for neighbourhood houses and community organisation. Move, Councillor Velotti. Councillor McCarthy.
I was going to propose a slight amendment, just one change to the second point, based on advice received very late in the day from officers.
Was that circulated, Councillor McCarthy?
It hasn't been circulated because it only came in just earlier, so it was simply
How
a change.
early, Councillor McCarthy, because we've had this. Anyway, that's
so the figure was simply to change the figure of 75% in point 2 to 100%.
Is the mover happy with that?
Yes, I am, Mr Mayor. That's fine.
Okay, all right. Councillor Villala is accepted. Councillor Villala, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a report that was in response to a council resolution that sought a further report on how much money the neighbourhood houses and other organisations receive from council. Excuse me. With regard to the potential of a CPI increase of 2.5, and if I recall, it was Councillor McCarthy who added that extra point when the report came to council, and I very much welcome that, because what we see here, Mr Mayor, is that the neighbourhood houses, Darebin Volunteer Information and Resource Centre, Diverse, the Darebin Community Legal Centre and DEC have not had an increase to their funding since July 2014. Now, as we know, Mr Mayor, these particular organisations are indispensable, I think, in council achieving a lot of its strategic goals. And in terms of the services that these organisations deliver, Mr Mayor, if council had to do them, it would probably cost 50% more. If not, and I'd say that's a very conservative estimate. The work that I don't need to mention, the significant work that Diverse does with attending to people who are lacking in for food. And who go hungry in our community. We know that Darebin Community Legal Centre does a great job, especially in relation to assisting women from diverse backgrounds in the area of domestic violence, in representing them. So these organisations and the neighbourhood houses do a great job. And when you look at the overall monies that we invest, I think is the right word to use, that we invest in these organisations, Mr Mayor, and the breadth of work that they do and how many different individuals in the community benefit from their services. Current budget is about 400,000, and it will increase. It's 399,104. And with the 2.5% increase, it goes to 409,077. So it's very marginal, the increase, but I'm quite confident, Mr Mayor, that 2.5 will go a long way in maybe some catch-up service delivery, because I know that community houses and the other organisations are always struggling for the next funding application or et cetera, et cetera. So I wholeheartedly commend the recommendation, and again I thank Councillor McCarthy for recognising maybe this maybe it's unintentional oversight, that sometimes we don't think about CPI increases, not for lack of care, but just maybe something that slipped under the carpet. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Seconder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Villella. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things, and I think all councillors would have attended events held by our various neighbourhood houses, community houses, and the other organisations listed. And I wanted to highlight the fact that what these organisations do, which are largely staffed by volunteers, and I've been on the board of SPAN and involved with other neighbourhood houses, and I've seen this at play, is they do an extraordinary amount of work on an incredibly small budget. And yet the costs that they incur in the delivery of those services, in the paying of the few staff that they do have, and of course meeting the increased compliance costs imposed upon them by state government through the ACFI and Learn Local programs that they're involved in, and some of them are running accredited training. Their costs have increased significantly, and the education services that they're providing are often for people who are re-entering the workforce for the first time, having not been in the workforce for a long time. They're often providing the only direct service support to our public housing tenants, and importantly they're working very collaboratively with other organisations, with council officers, to be our eyes and ears on the ground in every community in Darebin. And I think we need to recognise that in terms of assessing the validity of this proposal, which is to increase funding by CPI per annum. It brings them in line with the constraints that council faces in terms of the current rate capping environment. But I think it's also incumbent upon us as council to now go back to state government and make the argument even more strongly to say you need to chip in, and you need to chip in more because you've increased the compliance costs. So I don't think we should stop here. I think we're doing the right thing by applying the CPI, but we know when our neighbourhood houses are strong, they can do a world of difference, and we've seen that through the work they've done. And I would also make a point, and I'll end on this, Mr Mayor, it was actually our neighbourhood houses working in partnership with DEC and Diverse and other organisations that were the front line of support of emergency relief for asylum seekers and refugees recently, and they've won accolades in the community for that, and we need to thank them for that too.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Any other speakers? Councillor Walsh, you're first.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'll speak in favour of this and I'm speaking in support of this because this puts Elphington Neighbourhood House on the same footing as every other neighbourhood house in the city, and they should be, because they contribute just as much as the other neighbourhood houses do in the city. They always very active in the Darebin neighbourhood house network, if you like, and whenever there's events, and I've been to a couple of them. The Elphington people are always there, and I also acknowledge the work of their leadership group, including Becca Smith, who's a tireless worker for the local community in Elphington. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Any other speakers? Councillor Seedis?
Just a clarification, Mr. Mayor, because the email that's been talked about I didn't get, and I'd like an explanation as to why the movement from 75 to 100%.
It was set at 4:53 this afternoon. I understand there was dialogue with the mover, seconder and officers. Mr. Dev? Was there dialogue or not?
Sorry. There's been two sets of feedback that have been provided. I can clarify that's in relation to my comments. One set of feedback is from officers regarding how neighbourhood houses use their funding, what funding they receive from different councils, and there's also information that I've received having asked the organisation, Elphington Community House, what their funding arrangements are with Yarra as well, and how they would be spending additional money if received from Darebin. So I'm happy to share that with councillors if they'd like to hear it.
Just on that
and I know other councillors have been in contact with them today about that question too.
Just on that point, Ms. Meek, was the last trail that I received in relation to it was actually from Councillor Lee, just seeking clarification as to what the implications would be in terms of those funding adjustments. So just in relation to the movement, the question that was raised by Councillor Lee, if I recall correctly, in terms of moving down, suggested or implied that Yarra was withdrawing the level of funding in order to receive the sort of total figure of 100%. But now we're talking about 100%. Does that mean that Yarra is withdrawing, or we're seeking to sever our ties in joint funding with Yarra?
Katrina?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the query was around what would happen if we added more funding on, because the request was for an increase to 100%. The recommendation of the report was based on the fact that 75% of Elphington's population is served by Yarra. When we contacted the House this afternoon, they explained to us the funding model that Yarra has in place, which is different to the funding model that we have. But they were confident that any increase from us would not result in a decrease from them. So any increase in funding by Yarra would not result in a decrease of Yarra funding.
Mr. Deb, anything further to add?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, it's normally a part of the budget discussion. We wanted to bring it beforehand to the council to make decisions because detailed report can be provided. If council wants further explanation, we have no alternative other than requesting council to defer to through a briefing. We think it's all the information adequately provided now. The rest we can discuss in the budget time. But if council wants more details about what Yarra does or not, we might get it through a briefing.
Just on that point, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for the clarification from the CEO. I'm operating on the basis of the logic that Councillor Lee had put. There was a suggestion there that there was a level of funding mix. I won't call it co-funding because that's not accurate. There was a level of funding mix associated with the City of Yarra's input. So I am failing the logic. I think I can do simple maths, but I'm failing to understand the logic of if 25% is coming from Yarra and the recommendation says 75%, that equals 100%. So I'm failing the logic as to why council would need to go to 100% if Yarra is staying with their 25%. If, for instance, it's operating on the assumption that Yarra is withdrawing completely, then I understand why we're going up to 100%, and then it follows the logic in terms of the application of the CPI. But I'm not actually getting that clear understanding.
I can clarify if that helps to assist Councillor Seedis, because I think these are very reasonable questions. the information I've got here, which I'm conscious not all councillors have received because I've inquired a lot about this very fact from the coordinator, is that because the Alphington Community House actually services 2 different councils, it has twice as many compliance and reporting processes. In fact, it has different funding arrangements with Yarra. The money that it receives from Darebin goes towards servicing the Darebin activities, and of course it has activities that it takes place on the Yarra side. If Councillor Stevens wants to propose some words that sections off the Darebin contribution for Darebin residents, I'd be very happy. I'm assuming the mover might be happy to receive that too. But I think the point to be made is that if you make a comparison with, say, Reservoir services residents who are not just in the city of Darebin, but in fact live to our north. In the case of Alphington, it is the only neighbourhood house in the Alphington and Fairfield area, and so it has a very large catchment within Darebin, and therefore it is servicing a much more than just the Alphington pocket. So the idea here, as expressed by the manager there, is that the 100% of the funding, if 100% was to come, which is on par with the other neighbourhood houses, would actually be going to Darebin activities. So it's about us treating the
So we'll include some wording to that effect, I think, Mr. CEO, is that right?
Yeah, if I can mention,
I'm happy to change
see
the words.
We may have to.
Just to give some, background or context to the councillors, traditionally, state government funded all the neighbourhood houses.
Yes.
Progressively, they have withdrawn, and number of councils have stepped in and started funding some of the programs, not all the programs. This money is not to look after all the expenses. The rationale behind 75% was because catchment of 75% is still in Darebin. But if the council wishes to pay more for that part, but it's a part of their cost, not all the cost. But this is our funding, similar to other neighbourhood houses. But if you're asking for how much Yarra is providing, we assume it's about 40,000. We haven't done that research thoroughly. We will come back and provide that detail. But basically, we are stepping in where state government.
Councillor Cedars.
Well, on that point, I'll speak in favour. We did, in fact, towards the end of last year, sign a memorandum of understanding with all our neighbourhood community groups out there, which is probably a landmark position for any council, really. I don't know of any other one that's actually taken the position that we have. So, where are we now relative to rate capping? It seems to me, for all the good work that Councillor Valella had mentioned in her seconding, is at risk. So, is it a question then that follows that the reinvention of the wheel, as Mr. Dev has indicated, may be upon us? If it is that this is to be determined to be a non-core service, then they'd be funded directly from the Department of Community Services. Because that's where it goes. I mean, you can't have it both ways where you say, well, it's at your election, your discretion as to which services you continue to provide or not, but it must be within the constraints of a 2.5% CPI increase relative to the allowance that's been given from the Essential Services Commission. So at some critical juncture, maybe at the termination of these contracts, or even before the termination of these contracts, that we actually say to these people, unfortunately, we've got to let you go. And you're going to have to go directly to the state government to receive the level of funding that you've enjoyed hitherto till now. Because the reality of the situation is we are not going to be able to provide every level of service that we've been doing up until this point. And that's the consequence. So, we can wax lyrical about all the good that they've done over the years, and they have, and even relative to the cost of an in-house service provision. But the reality is they have been deemed as a non-core service provision, and we're going to have to come to grips with that reality, come either this budget time or into the next council, a progressive withdrawal, in fact, to be blunt, in terms of actually playing in this space. So, my point is,
thank you, Councillor Cedars.
we need to be cautious about not celebrating too much because the state government needs to take responsibility from here on.
Okay. So if there's no additional wording suggested, the motion is, with the amendment, with the inclusion, moved by Councillor Valella, seconded Councillor McCarthy. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That item is carried. Thank you,
Can we have
councillors.
that noted as unanimous, please?
Noted unanimous. Thank you. Minute takers. Next item is 6.2, Darabin Rail Level Crossing Removals.
Happy to see.
Move Councillor Lee, second Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a culmination of many years of lobbying and advocacy by the council. Late last year, the council received confirmation from the state government that not one but 3 level crossings will be removed here in Darabin, Grange Road, Reservoir Junction, and also Bell Street. And while the details of it are to be confirmed in terms of the design and the preferred options going forward, the report does note that there will be some extensive consultation starting from literally now right until end of this year to not only talk to our community but also feed it back to the local the level crossing removal authority. About a month ago, the council received a very comprehensive briefing from an expert in this area looking at the feasibility of the various options, and I hope our officers will make that information available in our community consultation period. I refer to page 12 of the report, Mr. Mayor, where we actually talk about the Darabin Connect project, which is something that's probably hasn't been picked up as much in people's minds. The Darabin Connect project actually seeks to maximise the community and public benefits along the South Morang line, because as you remove level crossings, the gradient required to remove that, you can actually bundle additional level crossings in it and therefore effectively double the community benefit or quadruple the community benefit, if you will, by removing more than just a named intersection. And that, as we all know, will provide enormous community benefit. Our Latrobe Ward councillors will tell us, and as we all know, that the Reservoir Junction essentially splits the community in half. You have Edward Street on one side, you have Broadway on the other. Similarly, on Bell Street, the railroad track actually prevents a lot of access from people living on the west side of the railway track, the east side of the railway track, accessing Great Brighton Garden and the Now Centre, because that's separated by the grade line. So when we do have level crossings removal project, they do actually provide a significant amount of community benefit, but we want to do more than that, as always. What we want to do is do the Darabin Connect project, thereby looking at the possibility of extending the level crossing removals and to double and quadruple the community benefit out there. So there are some very exciting times ahead, and I hope that the community will come on board and talk to us and give us their ideas, because we've got to bring the community along on this journey. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you, Councillor McCarthy. Sorry, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy, second.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we need to acknowledge something with this project, which is that it was actually in this chamber that it was raised that obviously the issue of the reservoir rail crossing has been raised for decades, and it's been a bugbear for the community for decades, but it was actually in this chamber, Councillor Lee at the very start of this term brought a notice of motion asking council to advocate for the removal of the Bell crossing. It was not on anyone's agenda until then, and this council picked that issue up and led the argument, and alongside Moreland talked about 4 level crossing removal projects. And I think we need to acknowledge that that work started here, and the reason why we need to acknowledge that is because our involvement must continue in relation to those particular projects, Reservoir and Bell, because of our long-standing advocacy. If we do not intervene in this space and harness and galvanise community interest in these projects and make sure that the community is aware of both the risks and the benefits, then we will not get the outcome that we spoke of several years ago now. And I say that very bluntly because I think that state governments are very good at making announcements about big infrastructure projects, but we are the ones that will deal with the detail on the ground. And that's regardless of whether it's above ground or below ground, that's irrelevant. The point here is about what is the final community outcome. We want to increase the frequency of trains through our area to increase and increase the volume of trains to enable less people to drive through our city and more people to catch the train. That's what's at the heart of this sort of initiative. But secondary to that, we actually want to make better use of the land that is going to be released, potentially, and wherever possible, for that to be a benefit to our community. And all we have to do is look around the land around Bell Station to see the opportunity there for urban improvements, open space, you name it. Likewise at Grange, we could see significant change, improvements to the cycling, pedestrian facilities, parkland, you name it. But we need to be in this space, we need to be making the case alongside our community, and that's what we're proposing tonight.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Any further speakers? Councillor Villella.
Just very quickly, Mr Mayor, I just, of course, want to commend all the work that the officers have done behind the scenes. I know that this has been, in addition to, notwithstanding the Councillor Lee advocating for the Bell Street crossing, but for many years there's been a lot of groundwork done by councillors before my time, and also officers have worked diligently in this space, and it seems like now it's all aligned. But I do believe, and I agree with Councillor McCarthy, that it's up to us to be very vigilant in the finer detail and make sure that the outcome is one that it's all about community first. So we do need to, and we hope that even the media will assist us on that to advocate community first and the needs of the residents, especially in Reservoir, where I think we've been waiting for 25 years or 30 years for it. So yeah, way before my time, Councillor, but you will remember it. Thank you. But I do want to note, and it's just noting that there's going to be some extensive consultation, community consultation. I just would like, I'm assuming that the officers will be communicating to the Alex, what does it stand for? The Level Crossing Removal Authority will be aware that our community is very diverse, and that in the community consultation they will be advised that they should be responding to a diverse community and ensure that they're culturally specific, and they do take into consideration that people speak languages other than English. So we hope that that could be communicated to the authorities so that the consultation is worthwhile. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Walsh. For or against?
I'm speaking for.
Yep.
This is look, I do support this, and I support the work done by council and the Level Crossing Removal Authority. But I think the most important thing here is that whilst we support the removal of the level crossings, it's important that it is done right. People have been waiting far too long for, and residents deserve a first class option. They don't deserve they don't deserve a second or third class option, which is why I am concerned that the removal of the level crossing could mean elevated rail, and I am concerned about the negative impacts that elevated rail or sky rail would have on our community. I've spoken to many residents who are actually genuinely quite concerned about the potential for sky rail in Darebin, and I'll foreshadow there could be a petition about this in the future, and I'm glad that the consultation is happening. However, it's important that the consultation is fair and square, because I don't think we know in the southeastern suburbs, in Murrumbina and in Oakley, the consultation was not fair; it was a sham.
Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh. And I will add the fact that it was very well articulated by Councillor Lee and also Councillor McCarthy in relation to the community benefits from Darebin Connect, the engagement in the consultation, and we're not considering any options yet until we've got the full information to the residents for us to eventually evaluate in conjunction with the relevant authorities. To Councillor Sears, anything new to add?
Yes.
Conscious of the time, we're running still on the second item.
Just on point one, Mr Mayor, I would take the soundings of the mover and seconder on this. It seems to me that there's one missing component on this. We've implicit within the report, we've accepted like as if public funding is the only solution to this. And I'm a little bit concerned because if we allow that to happen, and I know the state government has made public pronouncements in this space, but in reality, not every grade separation opportunity can be fully subscribed by the public purse. So I just wonder whether, for instance, we might consider, because there is language there at the bottom of point number 1, and to investigate the feasibility of additional grade separations along the South Marine Rail Corridor in Darwin, that an additional sub-point to that is alternative funding sources. And I'm happy to speak to it if it's acceptable by the movement and second it.
Can we hear the wording, please, Councillor Cetus?
That essentially at the end of where it says Darabin, at point number 1, and alternative funding sources to be considered by the government in relation to grade separation opportunities in Darabin.
I don't know if it's... Mover, second?
Yep.
Fine, that's been accepted.
Okay, just
Briefly.
I sort of just alluded to just a moment ago, Mr Mayor, to the logic behind this. It is a bit of a handbrake to expect that all these major infrastructure projects can be fully subscribed by the public purse. And if we're going to get into a competition between other municipalities, the risk is we're going to lose out to them. That's the reality. And I want to be blunt, those municipalities may traverse a lot of marginal seats. So in terms of the relative time that we have to realise some of these projects, and make no mistake, we are probably talking about within the timetable that's been specified, but what a great way to ensure that, by not putting all our eggs in one basket, in assuming, for instance, that everything will be delivered by the public purse, because I don't think that's going to happen. So we need to be a little bit smart. We just mentioned a moment ago in terms of the previous work the council has done in this space in terms of our advocacy. We did, over many years, going back now, I think, Mr Mayor, something like 5-6 years ago, present concept plans in terms of the potentials of what might happen in relation to grade separation at Reservoir, just to give one sample in terms of the development opportunity that may arise in terms of the air rights. So in that circumstance, you cannot expect that the state government is the one who's going to develop that opportunity. It will be through a tendering process which opens up the situation towards the private sector to come in and do it. So in that circumstance, you're talking about a classic PPP scenario. In other contexts, it's probably been seen as a bit of a dirty acronym, but the reality is, where public funds are constrained, this is the best way to accelerate some of these projects and get what we want, and overall, in terms of the multiple net benefits that occur. So I think, in a nutshell, Mr Mayor, just to conclude, we should be pushing for the state government to have some flexibility in terms of their rationale behind it, and consider, where appropriate, the opportunities lie in order to go through a tendering process, to get the privates in, to inject some further funding to see these projects come to reality once and for all.
Thank you, Councillor Cetus. I think that concludes the debate. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Next item of consideration is 6.3, Amendment C156, a request of ministerial amendment for enabled residential zone. Councillors? Moved, Councillor Lee. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Seconded, Councillor McCarthy. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is the Amendment C156 of our Darabin Planning Scheme. Councillors and residents will recall that in the planning zone exhibition phase, the council officers have taken fairly extensive community consultation and presented with the then planning minister with some fairly logical and rational arguments regarding the neighbourhood residential zones in Darabin. What came back to us was dramatically different to what we asked. In fact, it came to less than a third of what we asked for. To the contrary, when you look at our neighbours in Moreland and Yarra, they got far in excess of what they asked for. So this seems, at a first sight, a fairly iniquitous process, whereby those other councils were given preferential treatment at the expense of our own Darabin residents. Not letting that issue rest, the council has written and through our officers and the work they've done to increase that neighbourhood residential zone coverage to be up to 60% of of our land here in Darebin. While we're in the process of doing that, what C1566 seeks to do is to essentially come to a halfway point, which is to say we come back and say at least 30% of land in Darebin ought to be earmarked as neighbourhood residential zone, while we still pursue the ultimate goal of achieving 60% NRZ rating, which our officers have assured to us that they have done some fairly extensive work in and have got very warm reception from the relevant officers in the State Planning Department. The danger of not doing C1556 is quite clear. If we do not do C156, then our planning scheme is essentially left to be exploited by perhaps then less than scrupulous developers seek to maximise this loophole and put in inappropriate high-density development around our neighbourhood areas where they ought to be protected. So while C156 is not an ideal solution, it is nonetheless a step in the right direction, and it's the interim way forward while we're still negotiating with our with the State Planning Department to ensure that the appropriate amount of our neighbourhoods receives the appropriate NRZ rating. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually feel sick to the stomach, to be honest, even speaking to this, because I feel that this item represents everything that is wrong with planning in Victoria and particularly planning in the northern suburbs right now in comparison to our neighbours in the east and in the south. And in fact, not even just in the east and the south, but to our immediate west and to our immediate south, Mr. Mayor. Because if ever there was a situation, a tale of two cities, or one city versus its two neighbours, this is it. We have been dudded. And I'll be frank, we have been dudded because we went to our community with a very reasonable proposal in the lead up to in 2014. It was completely trampled all over by the previous Planning Minister, Mr. Guy, now the opposition leader. And subsequently, through the great work of our officers and our community, we advocated to be treated alongside in an equal way with our neighbours Yarra and Moreland, who had pre-election commitments to neighbourhood residential zones in the order of 60 to 80%. All we sought was to be treated fairly and equally on par as an equivalent municipality. What we have instead received, I think, is a cruel joke, and I think it's a demonstration. If you look at the increase in medium density housing applications in Darebin compared to Moreland through that period, you are starting to see the emergence of a trend, and councillors have a copy of the graph which demonstrates the point at which we are departing very clearly from Moreland, and in fact we are now the beacon or the magnet for poorly designed medium density development in our side streets and not in our preferred developmental areas. So we are. This is almost a band-aid, if you're able to describe it in such a way, to try to stop the on-surge or the in-surge of poor applications from coming against our planning department and therefore council and our community.
Time, Councillor McCarthy.
So we need to act. This is not the final solution.
Thank you. Councillor Viola?
Against.
Speaking against, okay.
I can understand why Councillor McCarthy is sick in his stomach to support it, because I suppose I can't support it because it's a principle at stake here, and I just think that this whole process, it's delivered us nothing other than an injustice, and it has put an incredible burden on our officers. The workload has been extraordinary, and the good faith that in which the officers have carried on the work for the various applications, and this has been going on for 2 years, only to get a kick in the guts from the various minister and the planning authority, where we come out totally disadvantaged. I don't understand what the difference is between Darebin and Moreland. I really don't get it. Both safe well, maybe Moreland's not as safe as it used to be, but I just don't understand it. There is something fundamentally wrong. I can understand because we're sort of used to the inequities with the leafy eastern suburbs, But the difference between Moreland and Darebin is to me a mystery. We were given 11.5% NRZ1, and I think Moreland got 80 or thereabouts. So, and now we're asking, we have to go through the laborious task again and ask for 30%, and that's not even guaranteed. So I just object to the process. I object to the fact that we've got to go through this. What we should have achieved and what we should have been given is equity with our neighbouring councils. So I protest alone can't support this, Mr.
Thank you, Councillor Valera. If there's no further speaker, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? Carried. Next item of consideration is 6.4, the proposed dog off-lead area in Johnson Park, Northcote.
I'd like to actually, and this is, I apologise to councillors for the lateness of this, but it's come to my attention that there are some missing pieces in this report. I'd like to propose an alternative, which is that council defer the matter to receive options regarding designated time periods for off-lead access.
What was that? Sorry?
I'm happy to second that.
You'll defer it, Councillor.
I'll read the words again if it helps.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The council defer the matter to receive options regarding designated time periods for off-lead access.
Oh, okay. Because he hasn't got it. Yeah.
Not there.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, all right, so we've had a defer request from Councillor McCarthy, seconded by Councillor Valera, was it? Councillor Walsh? Was it Councillor Walsh?
Oh, both, yeah.
Councillor Walsh. May need to speak to it.
Councillor
Seeders.
Neither's not going to. I'd like
I'll
to speak, please.
I'll just speak to it, just
Yeah.
to be clear. Look, I'm in two minds about this, Mr. Mayor, and I'm reluctant to, certainly not happy to support the report as it is, because one of the things, if you look at the submissions, is a number of submissions trying to be creative and trying to provide constructive solutions here, and putting forward the option of a designated time period, sort of 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. through to 6 or 7 a.m. To allow, and that was some of the submissions that were made in the Hearing Submissions Committee, and certainly approaches that have been made to myself and possibly other councillors to see if there's a middle ground on this proposal. That has not been considered at all in the report, and I don't understand why. It seems like a reasonable thing for us to consider. I'm not wedded to it, but at the moment we've got a winner or loser scenario, and I don't think that's actually what we're trying to achieve here. I think the objectors made some very relevant points about the access to Johnson Park, and I don't feel that they've been reflected in the report, and that might be because of the time period that we've had to get this report back to us. So I'm not in any rush to make a decision about this, and I'd be reluctant to support the current proposal because I think it necessarily doesn't take into account some of the proposals put forward by submitters. So I'd like to see those before we go any further.
So specifically what you ask for, information in relation to times.
In relation to designated time periods for off-lead access.
Have the other parks got that, Mr. Dev?
Not at the moment.
Mr. Councillor Walsh?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Look, I support Councillor McCarthy's deferral motion because when I read through the report, I was in the same kind of frame of mind, going, well, this is all very well, but I didn't think the report had fully was fully cognizant of the various various submissions that we received, and so I think there's still, there's potential for a good outcome here, but I don't think we're ready for that good outcome, and that outcome tonight, and so that's why I think we should defer it as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Speakers against, Councillor Seeders.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, thanks. Regardless of whether it's a deferral or considering the substantive item, and I hope that the amendment is lost, we should be dealing with a substantive one. The hearing of submissions that we've heard to date on this issue were illustrative, at least for one thing, that we did not even receive one submission from an alleged larger group, it must be said, and I emphasise that point, who were in favour of this. So I don't know what should be had. The implicit within number 2 well, at least number one rather, in terms of the designation of the area, is and you just received, Mr. Mayor, a question with respect to, from Mr. Dev, an answer with respect to whether we have policing times in other parks. We don't. And the reality is it's because of the practicality. So I think it's a bit of a nonsense to talk about designated times. The minute you actually support the substantive consideration before us, it means you have a permanent enclosure, which means that people can access it anytime. So I don't get this sort of the shandy arrangement that you would have half the day, presumably, if that's the logic that's coming from Councillor McCarthy and the information that he's received, that you would have half the day non-dog off lead or whatever you want to call it, and then the other time would. And yet we're still talking about it being in an enclosure. The presumption on the time would be without an enclosure, because that makes logic to me and makes sense to most people. We're talking about a designated space, so I don't know why you would have a designated time. If the presumption of safety is there because you've got a barrier, and that's debatable, then you wouldn't need to worry about time. So I think it's a nonsense deferring it on that basis, and I hope that the deferral is lost so we can deal with the substantive recommendation, because I'd like to speak against it.
Thank you, Councillor Setis. Any other speakers? Councillor Williams?
I too would also like to speak against it. I understand Mr McCarthy's sentiment in regards to it, but my biggest concern is probably signage. We've had major discussions and debates regarding signage and putting in our parks. I would consider that we would have to put extra signage regarding this matter, and that means it'll come from our budget, and I think that it would have, it would be fine. It would be difficult in getting up for that reason alone.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any other speakers? Councillor Villela?
Look, I think it's a really good point that Councillor McCarthy raised, because if we're going to do it, we need to do it properly, and the times is often an issue. And as a former dog owner, there was always times allocated where I would go and take where there were dogs off leads. There would always be a time allocation, and it was always very clear. So I do think that we do need to. Sorry?
In Darebin?
No, not in Darebin. In other places, not in Darebin. And it's always very clear what time, when you can and when you can't. So I think I think it's an oversight. We need to be very, we need to be careful that we've crossed all the T's and dotted the I's, and I think that this does need to be attended to. And it would be on the same sign. It's not an extra sign. It's just added information on the same sign. So I can't see how it could be, how we could increase the budget for signage. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Do you want to close the debate?
I'll just close the debate. As I said from the outset, I'm not wedded to either position on this. What I am concerned about actually is the broader question, which is that when we undertake a hearing of submissions process, we should actually be reporting back substantially on the submissions that were received and our responses to the concerns and issues raised. And I just don't feel that in terms of negating this proposal or affirming this proposal, that we've actually taken on board or responded to one of the key proposals that was put on the table at the time. I take Councillor Setis' point. It may be impractical to fence off a section for periods of time, or to fence it off. I think that's a very realistic and very appropriate point to make. The question here is actually the thoroughness of the process, and I think if we're asking people to come and make submissions, there were some written submissions in favour of this, there were more against it, and there was a petition of some 400 or so people. I've heard from some of those 400 or so people who've said, I don't want to see the whole thing be an off-lead area all the time, I want it to be an off-lead area part of the time. I think that's a realistic and reasonable question to ask as well. Hence my reason at this stage to say, can we actually get some consideration of that? Because if we're not going to go down this path, I'd like to have a good reason as to why we're not going to. If we are, by the same token. So it's about the thoroughness of the report more than the substantive matter, and I apologise if that wasn't clear, but I think there's a general common view here which is about how we might move forward. So I'll end it there.
Okay, thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Mr. Dev?
Yeah, just clarifying, not to enter into any debate. Usually, in the submission process, section 223, we need to specify in advance for the committee to consider. So there's an issue about it. So it's only a deferral. So we'll be discussing the details against 1, 2 to 3. I would argue at this point, normally, if you want to consider the time, you should allow the people to consider that. We didn't in this instance.
Thank you.
Thank you for that
Thank you.
extra information. I'll put that to a vote for deferral of the item. All those in favour? Those against? That item is deferred till when, Mr Nev?
As soon as possible.
As soon as possible. Thank you. Okay. That concludes our consideration reports. We now go to item 7, consideration of responses to notices of motion 7.1, the Darwin Public Toilet Strategy.
Yeah, to move it, Mr Mayor. This is
Councillor
a,
Villela.
Happy to second it.
yeah, this is a really important document. Easy to mock and whatnot, but we have 58 public toilets in the city of Darebin, and we haven't had. There was a draft strategy in 1999, but was never endorsed. And if you read the report, Mr Mayor, what's happened is that the public toilets have been attended to in an ad hoc way, and really you could say there's been a bit of neglect because they haven't been attended to in a coordinated and sustained manner. So what this strategy does, Mr Mayor, is address the shortcomings and looks towards ensuring that all 58 toilets will be, there's a timeline there, all 58 toilets will be attended to, and that there are environmental goals to be met, for example, the use of solar energy, natural light, etc., etc. Also, safety is another objective, and also, Mr Mayor, the access of toilets 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I think that's another goal, because at the moment even the opening hours are ad hoc. So whilst we spend a lot of resources and talk about, you know, our open green spaces and making sure they're family friendly, we invest a lot of money in play spaces, etc. The toilets is obviously an important service, and that also needs to be attended to so that the community has access to all required facilities. So it's an important document. I would like to acknowledge the work that the officers have done. It's extensive, and I think it's something that is long overdue. There will be funding considerations that come up during funding deliberations, of course, Mr Mayor, so it's good timing. At least we know that if we need to put resources aside for this particular strategy, that it is coming up to budget time, so I think that the timing is good. So good work, and it needed to be done. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Villela. Councillor McCarthy, a second, anything to add?
Oh, look, just very quickly, councillors, if having seen the attachment and the actual strategy itself, would see that there are a range of factors included here which council would be considering if this strategy is adopted. Importantly, one of the key things which I think is important and aligns with our social inclusion policies is to look at transitioning to more unisex toilets, which provide more opportunity for people who are identifying as transsexual and of other gender identities, and I think we need to move to a more inclusive model rather than the binary gender, which we've made that difference on our forms. We need to now start to make that difference in our facilities. And of course in our pools, in our swimming pools, this has been pointed out as a key point of obtrusion for people to be able to access those facilities. I also think there's a lot of work in here about families and the ability for families to use public toilets. Having been, as a father, having had 2 kids, being on my own as an adult, as the only adult with 2 kids, it is very challenging with public toilets because you're put in a ridiculous situation sometimes. So there's some consideration for that, particularly around baby change facilities and family toilet arrangements, and that's about being an inclusive community. So I think there's a lot of work that's gone into this. No strategy is always perfect. I'm sure there are things that need more work and refinement as we go through the budget process and the projects. But critically, we have talked about the service levels, responding to where the needs are, but also maximising that with appropriate design for safety as well. And that's the other thing that we need to keep in mind, is that toilets are places that are public facilities, but they are also places where we want people to feel safe and be safe in those spaces too. So I'll end it there. A lot of work, and I appreciate all the consultation that's gone into this.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. If there's no further debate on the topic, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. Okay, that's item 7 dealt with. We now go to item 8, a notice of motion. This was carried over from the previous meeting, 8.1. Murals at Ruby Thompson Reserve and Smith Street, Collingwood. That was yours, Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
With the seconder, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And look, I'd just like to first of all acknowledge that this has been an issue which has actually continued to remain in the public sphere since the awful graffitiing of a mural in the city of Yarra in Smith Street in the Collingwood-Fitzroy border there, which happened recently, which depicted the lives of women in Northcote. This was a mural erected in the mid-1980s. Whilst it was depicting predominantly Greek and Lebanese and Italian women from the Northcote area at the time, it was placed in the Smith Street area, and of course I think we maintained some connection. So what I've proposed here in this notice of motion is that Council liaise with the City of Yarra, who is starting to look at what to do with that site, and with the state government, importantly, because it is a state government building, but importantly look a bit more closer to home, and of course the tragedy that has occurred at Ruby Thompson Reserve over many years, and I think has gotten to the point of disgrace, whereupon a mural which was known as the Youth Mural, also painted by Megan Evans and local residents and other artists, has been covered in pretty awful tagging, and to the point where there's barely any of the original mural recognisable. So what I've proposed here is that Council work in tandem with local residents, the arts ambassadors, and invite the original artists to contribute as well, to see what can be done in that space, whether it's a reinstatement, a reimagination, or whatever it might be of that mural, because it is part of our history, part of our local cultural history, and just like the Kuru mural, which we worked with the Aborigines Advancement League and Megan Evans as the artist to restore, albeit in a different form, and some updating of it as well for recent events, we could do something similar here. So it's about getting the conversation going, making that statement in favour of our own local cultural heritage, and seeing where we can move this forward.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee, anything further to add?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Very briefly, I understand this mural is located in the City of Yarra, and while it's sad that City of Yarra no longer sees itself as part of the northern suburbs, I think this issue transcends across the city borders.
We'll forgive them.
On this issue, at least. Because what Councillor McCarthy recognises is a very important contribution about the Darabin artists into this mural project. And more importantly, as Councillor McCarthy said earlier, we have just undertaken a very successful mural renewal program on the corner of St George's Road and Miller Street to the wider claim of our Indigenous community, both here in Victoria but also Australia-wide. And that should be recognised as the good work that's done by our officers. So we do have some expertise in the area, we do have some knowledge in the area, and we're not shy about sharing that, and we sincerely hope that our neighbours in the south will appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. If there's no further comment on that, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, councillors. We'll now go to urgent business, Mr Deb, and we've received some items this evening, yes?
Mr Mayor, there are 4 items today. 3 of them have been raised by councillors. I included for council's consideration as urgent business or not.
Okay, we have 3 urgent and 1 which will be considered confidential, yes?
Yeah, 1/4 item from the officers
right.
to be considered.
First one, Mr Dev, is which one? Which we'll do first?
The one listed first is...
Councillor Williams?
Yeah. Yes.
Council officers, yep. Right, what we'll do now is go to a vote to include this urgent item to be included into the agenda. So I'll have Councillor Williams move. Councillor Lee has seconded to include the item. All those in favour? It's carried. Now over to you, Councillor. Oh, and the next one too. There's one from Councillor Lee to be included into the agenda. Move Councillor Lee. Second, Councillor Walsh. Put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. And the third item to be included is one from Councillor McCarthy. So he's moved. Second, Councillor Walsh. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's been included into the agenda. And now the fourth one is a confidential item which we'll be considering in camera this evening. If someone moved that, we've had a bit of a chat before. Move Councillor Valola. Second, Councillor McCarthy. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. That's going to be included into tonight's agenda in camera. So we'll now go to the first item of urgent business, that coming from Councillor Williams.
Yep, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's pretty simple that...
I'll get you to read it out for the benefit of the members of the gallery.
Okay.
I'll second it, Mr Mayor.
That council officers organise a
Second,
meeting
Councillor
by
Lee.
Friday the 8th of April of appropriate stakeholders, including the President of the Preston Junior Football Club, the Mayor and available councillors, CEO and council officers to discuss the issues and concerns that they have raised by the residents regarding the use of the Preston City Oval, with the intent that no Darebin sporting clubs will be disadvantaged.
Thank you very much. You may speak to it briefly because Councillor Lee seconded. You speak to it.
Just quickly, just want to... the reason I have brought this up is because I've had several inquiries and emails from residents and parents, and also the sporting club such as Preston Bull Ants. There seems to be a bit of confusion where we've got training and allocation of sporting grounds and where our clubs are playing at this point in time, considering there's only a few weeks off before actual playing starts. Where there's a bit of confusion where all our teams and sporting is going to be allocated. So I thought it'd be good to have all our stakeholders come together, have a discussion, and then we can have a future where those sporting grounds and training sessions will take place. We do have a number of grounds been upgraded, so therefore there's been a little bit of delay in having these training sessions at such places, so we need to come up with some other strategy and sit down and discuss the matter.
Thank you, Councillor. We might just change the word second last sentence raised by residents to sporting clubs, because we do have quite a few stakeholders using that facility, so we just amend that word residents to sporting clubs. Okay. Councillor Lee, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for raising this issue, Councillor Williams. I think it's a very important issue. The Preston Junior Football Club usually trains at Zwar Park, and through our council resolution as part of our capital works program, Zwar Park is actually getting capital improvement done to have the oval drained, because as council officers and councillors are very aware, every time there's heavy rain, that particular western end of the Zwar Park turns to a mud pit. As part of that relocation, as part of that drainage works, the footy club has been relocated to train at the Preston City Oval. Recently, they've been notified that they may have to vacate that area because another club from another municipality may be seeking to train there. I think the heart of the motion that Councillor Williams proposed is that no Darebin sporting club should be disadvantaged, and I think that's a critical point. We collect our rates, we make sure that these rates are put to good use to our youth and to our sporting citizens of the city. While we would accept and welcome other players from other municipalities, we should always put our residents ahead of others, and I make no bones about that, and I think Councillor Williams makes a very pertinent point, because if we are to use our rates to maintain our grounds, our residents should come first and our children should come very first. So I welcome the urgent business, and I hope that meeting will be conducted as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lee. I think it's pretty straightforward. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Next urgent item is by Councillor Lee. If you can just read your out.
Happy to second.
Second McCarthy. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll just read out that motion as required. That the Council, 1, maintain the closure of the slip lane at the corner of Oakover Road and High Street after the removal of the pop-up park at this location, and 2, be presented with a report on the feasibility of a permanent green open space at this location in consultation with the Jump Community Reference Group and other stakeholders. The report may consider how such green open spaces can be constructed and maintained by community members or groups.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor McCarthy has seconded, so over to you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor McCarthy. The councillors have been notified of the removal of the pop-up park at the corner of Oakover Road and High Street. This was no surprise, because the pop-up park was always meant to be a temporary solution, a pilot, if you will, to see how that would work. The feedback that I've been getting is that it does increase the amenity of that area, and it actually creates a little green pocket space, which sadly is lacking in the jump area. The residents were notified in the same letter regarding pop-up park removal that the slip lane will be reopened, and this is where some of the concerns arise, because as the slip lane actually was removed and sealed off in order to decrease traffic speed, because the speed in that section is 40 km per hour anyway, but also increase pedestrian safety, we do have a number of young families who actually use that area, use that location to cross over to go to the South Preston Shopping Centre. That and also the recent made pedestrian safety refuges along Raglan Street. So that area does provide not only a public amenity but also a safety refuge for people who use that area. The second part of my report really asks is that because we actually own that land and because there has been no objection from especially Australia Post to having that land closure, there is a real possibility of creating an extra green open space in that area where there is none. But this doesn't actually need to cost council money because we already had community groups, a number of residents expressed an interest wanting to not only construct the planter boxes and plant it, but also maintain it and water it for free. So what they really want is the council to give you the green light so they can actually put in what they would like to see happen in the area. So it essentially presents a win-win scenario for the community, for the council, but also for the public as well in terms of increased amenity and decreased safety risks. So I do look forward to getting that report should this motion pass tonight, and I think this area is in urgent need of that renewal in line with our junk master plan and the use of our community reference group, which the council resolved to pass some 3 or 4 months ago.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCarthy, anything to add?
Just very quickly, I think I'd like to thank Councillor Lee for taking the initiative on this, but also recognise there is a petition of residents also calling for this, and it's important that we, I think, as a council, be really responsive in these situations because, and I travel through that section not on a daily basis, but certainly a few times a week, and I'd say that it's a very hard environment there. There's a lot of hard concrete surfaces, bitumen, it's very hot. And it is a place which has been traditionally a manufacturing and industrial area with some housing off to the side. It is now transitioning to a residential and commercial and retail area. And what goes with that is a need to soften the environment, to bring some greenery into the space. Obviously, we'd love to see a lot more, and that's what the JUMP project is all about. But in the interim, until we get down that full train of getting all the trees planted and all those other activities that need to take place, let's strike while the iron's hot. The other thing which Councillor Lee alluded to, which is important with this project, is that it has actually minimised the amount of heavy truck movements into that section of Oakover Road, and that has completely changed the pedestrian experience going down Oakover Road from High Street. At the school where one of my children goes, there are a range of parents that travel from the South Preston side across to along Oakover Road there. They actually have commented what a difference it makes to their own experience having a narrower road there which doesn't draw as much traffic, and certainly a point of refuge there as well. A permanent community garden operated by, for instance, the local church and local residents would be a fantastic outcome, but it would also do what we've done in other parts of Darebin, which is use community gardens such as down at the Merry Station and other locations to change the way people think about a place and to create that ownership and that sense of public safety. So I think it would be a really great outcome, and it's easy for us to do because they are council roads.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor, you'll be submitting a petition with this item.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I've just been alerted by our Executive Manager of Governance that I need to actually table this petition.
Yes, okay.
This petition was circulated to all councillors from concerned residents, and for the sake of the audience, I'll just read it all out. I won't read out the names.
Okay, not yet. First we'll take a vote on the other one, and then we'll go to yours. Okay, so if there's no further discussion on the item as a notice of motion, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Carried. Now, Councillor Lee, you want to table the petition?
Well, we'll just have that notice unanimous. That
That's
motion was passed unanimously. So now I would like to submit this motion for tabling. The petition reads: Dear councillors, we, the undersigned, live and work in the area present known as the Junction. We are committed to working alongside the Darebin City Council in the proposed plans to convert this part of Preston into a more pedestrian-friendly neighbourhood where traffic is calmer and the sense of community is enhanced by planting of trees and general upgrade of amenities. We understand that Pop-Up Park at the corner of Oakover and High Street was a temporary fixture and that the park will be removed by the beginning of April. We would like to ask the Darebin Council to consider leaving the slip road for vehicles turning left from High Street into Oakover Road closed to traffic for the time being, allowing for further community discussion about the future of this space.
Thank you, Councillor. That's going to be submitted, tabled to the CEO, correct?
Yes,
thank you. And we have a seconder?
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Do you wish to speak to it?
No, I think it's
Pretty much covered, okay. I'll put that to a vote then. All those in favour? That's been accepted. Thank you, Councillor Lee. We have one more urgent item from Councillor McCarthy. I do apologise, you'll need to read it out.
Yes,
We don't have our
that's fine.
screen working, so members of the gallery can hear what's being considered.
If I've got a seconder.
I'll second.
Second, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll read the motion out. The motion is that Council, 1, notes its previous resolutions adopted in relation to the St George's Road Shared Path and M40 project, and these are the points that follow. A like-for-like reinstatement of the trees, recognising the high amenity value they offer. Improved safety for all road users, St George's Road users, including removal of non-signalised vehicle crossover points. Providing appropriate line of sight allowances for pedestrian and cycling crossing points. Duplication of the path to provide separate bicycle and pedestrian paths. And managing pedestrian and cyclist safety for the duration of the project. Point 2. As a matter of urgency and in the absence of relevant local data to determine site triangles, requests that Melbourne Water undertake speed recording of cyclists to determine appropriate line of sight triangles at relevant intersections with St George's Road. 3. Requests that Melbourne Water present to Council the results of its cycle speed findings and its plan for the St George's Road median prior to the completion and release of the tender specifications for the project.
And Councillor Lee has seconded. So, Councillor McCarthy, you have the floor.
Look, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just quickly, councillors would be aware from communication from residents and communication with officers that the specifications for the Melbourne Water's replacement of the M40 pipeline, and therefore what takes place above that along the median of St George's Road, are moving very quickly. Council has been very successful working in partnership with the community to push for a no net loss and a like-for-like replacement of the trees, which form the major green avenue along in the northern suburbs, if you ignore Royal Parade. And of course, critically, we've played a role in advocating for improved cycling and pedestrian safety. Where we are now is that we do not have specific data to help inform the site triangles, which are the points at which cyclists interface with the crossover roads. Council is advocating for the removal of all the non-signalised crossing roads along that St George's Road section, notably Gadd Street, which of course has recorded the highest number of incidents between cyclists and vehicles crossing over. So we need that data, and we do not own the asset. It's actually Melbourne Water's asset, which is that whole median. So we're asking Melbourne Water to actually do the work of identifying what the speeds are to inform their site triangles. In the absence of that, they may default to the site triangles that are identified by Vic Roads or another agency. We'd like them to look at what's taking place because, of course, critical to here is we want to keep people safe, but we also do not want to lose trees, and that's why we've maintained our commitment to a like-for-like, no net loss of trees along the corridor. We want to continue to see that green avenue along that St George's Road corridor, but we also want to make sure that we step up our advocacy to the state government to remove those crossings, to duplicate the path, and of course to make sure that we get an improved outcome for both amenity and for safety.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lee.
Yes, thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for putting those words together. It is very important to note that this is a Melbourne Water project. However, we're a major stakeholder in this, and of course we do need to advocate for the retention of the trees, which Councillor McCarthy has successfully done through this council some month ago in terms of getting Melbourne Water to commit its like-for-like replacement trees. And I do want to put on record my appreciation for Melbourne Water for to come to the party to affirm its commitment for like-to-like replacement for trees. What Councillor McCarthy is asking for is to, again, in order to not only maintaining that like-for-like tree, but also improving the public amenity for all road users along the St George's Road shared path, is to actually conduct safety or the speed audit of cyclists travelling down that path. What that speed audit will do, it actually will help us and Melbourne Water to determine what is an appropriate line of sight, because the figure that we've been given is not from Darebin and is, probably not site-specific enough to allow for that to happen. What the second part of Councillor McCarthy's urgent business will allude to is that speed audit would actually inform us, do we need to have less aggressive line of sight perhaps, and thus not only save the trees, but perhaps with the closure of potential closure of some vehicle crossing points, actually have a net gain of trees along that. And I think all community members will be getting behind the council on that. And I certainly hope that Melbourne Water will do its due diligence in terms of not only reaffirming its commitments for life and light, but also deliver above and beyond to what they've achieved in order to show its goodwill to our community. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Walsh?
Mr. Mayor, I'll just speak in favour of it quickly, and I thank Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Lee for their work on this. Look, I think that this is something important, and we do need to, again, signal our intention in terms of the retention of the trees along St George's Road, because the trees are very important to the city, and as Councillor McCarthy said, to the northern suburbs. And Councillor McCarthy raised Royal Parade, and I think Royal Parade's a good example of places where there are a lot of trees across, trees down the trees on the road, and Rathdown Street as well. And I was driving down Rathdown Street last night, and I thought that and it made me think of this. So I think we do need to protect the trees along St George's Road, and certainly signal our intentions in terms of the safety. We do need to have a better study in terms of the speeds, because as Councillor McCarthy has already said, there's no data to suggest how long no data on this, and the report that the officers were using came from Brisbane.
Okay, if there's no further comment, I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? That item is carried. Thank you, Councillor. That concludes our urgent business. Councillor Walsh has informed me he would like to table a petition. So can I have Councillor Walsh who wish to move, and someone to second?
Can we see who the petition is?
Read out first, please.
Okay. We, the residents of Mansfield Street, Thornbury, would like the Darebin Council Transport Department not to install angle parking in Mansfield Street, Thornbury, and to provide another option for traffic management without angle parking.
Happy to
Second, Councillor McCarthy. Thank you. Just table it to the CEO. Councillor Walsh, okay? All right. Put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Okay. That concludes our items of urgent business. General business. Any general business, Mr. CEO?
None today.
None tonight. Item 11 is records of assemblies of councillors. That's number 11. Have a mover there.
Yes.
Move Councillor Williams, second Councillor Lee. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried.
Sorry.
Next item is reports by mayors of councillors. These have been circulated. I will note that 2 councillors haven't submitted theirs. They need to be in prior to the commencement of the meeting so they can be recorded and minuted for the next meeting. Otherwise, put them in for the next one. I have a mover for that.
Happy to move.
Yep.
Move Councillor McCarthy, second Councillor Walsh. Put that to a vote. All those in favour? That's carried. That concludes item 12. Items 13, consideration reports confidential. We have one item which has been submitted for consideration by council to be confidential, so I'll need to ask the gallery to vacate the chambers while we consider this.
I'll move the... Oh, sorry.
Councillor Williams has moved. Councillor Lee has seconded. So I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? Those against? Carried.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Members of the gallery, if you can just vacate the chamber while we consider this item. We won't be very long. And it could be an early night too.